During the last episode of The Forge, I had talked about a card that had prophecy and it had a unique interaction that I said I would elaborate later upon. That interaction was the idea of a prophecy card that was weaker when played as prophecy and then was more powerful if you played it on your turn. And I feel like that's a really interesting design philosophy to explore. Currently, the prophecy cards that exist are kind of balanced around the idea of them being overcosted if they're played during your turn, but then very, very beneficial or undercosted if played as a prophecy, right? So like that's the balance decision that they have made. Piercing Javelin is a great example, right? Many people think that even at 5 they would still play it, but the truth is when you compare it to some other cards like Edict of Azura or similar effects, it's still technically overcosted at 5. That's meant to offset the fact, that it can be played as a prophecy, which is a big tempo swing typically. Dark Harvester is again kind of the same idea, right? For what you get out of the card, 7 is pretty overcosted. So I thought, what if instead cards were correctly costed, or at least costed in a mostly correct manner, right? But instead just were weaker when played with the prophecy version. So I got a couple of them that I'm going to share with you in terms of, again, like rough draft basic design ideas to kind of display how I think something like this could work. So the first one I have is Daedric Shackles. So this is an action, and it will shackle and silence a creature when played, but if it's played during your turn, you get to draw a card. So if it comes up as a prophecy, you can, obviously play it if you need it, as an emergency type thing. You're trying to stop an attack, silence a creature that you don't want to, get an interaction. It has that benefit. But if you really don't need it right at that moment, you can opt to put it into your hand and then play it, and then it also cycles itself so that you can maybe dig deeper for the thing that you really wanted, right? So it's creating a decision for the player who's triggering the prophecy, and that's ultimately what I'm looking for when I create these kinds of cards are, can I create interesting player decisions? To me, I think that's the crux of any good card game, right? The crux of what makes the game feel skillful. You're presented with a scenario, and then you have to decide what the best possible decision would be. And I think that that's something to aim for with the prophecy cards. I think that this type of balance is a better way to do that. So, anyway, Daedric Shackles is the first one. The second one that I've got is kind of vanilla, like, I'll be honest, but it's again kind of reinforcing that same thought process. So Breton Defender is a prophecy creature. It's a 3-costed 2/2 guard, but if it's played during your turn, give it ward. So 3 for a 2/2 ward with guard is actually pretty, efficiently costed. It's 1 more cost than Evermore Steward, but you get, +1/+1 in the body, which is kind of a big deal. But if it's not played on your turn, you don't get the guard. So again, much weaker when played as a prophecy, but you still potentially get to use it in that emergency situation, right? That, oh man, I really need to stop taking, damage this turn so that I can try to stabilize. But if it's not necessarily an emergency, or maybe I trigger it really early off the first rune, it's not such a no-brainer play to just slap it down, because a 2/2 is, not like tide turning often. So to me, again, I think that's kind of what I'd be looking for, right? The idea of it shouldn't be a no-brainer, easy decision play every time, right? Like, that's what Moonlight Werebat used to be. Every time it came up, you played it, right? There are many prophecies that are like that, and I'm not necessarily saying that those are a bad thing either, but to me, I think that it should always be something to strive for, and making the player make a decision. What's best for me right now? Identifying the best plays and then making them is what, to me, makes a card game feel skillful. So that's why I like design choices like this. So for the next 2 cards, they kind of serve as a play on something that a lot of the community has asked for in the past, and that is the idea of prophecy cards that you play with whatever your remaining magicka was in your pool. So this is something that comes up frequently as a way to potentially balance prophecy cards. And, you know, I think prophecy is kind of fine the way that it is. I think that it's necessary to be the tempo swing required to turn the tide of battle. I've talked about this at length, so I won't go over it again. If you want to hear my thoughts on it, you can check out the Why is Prophecy So Polarizing video that's on the channel. But that being said, I think there is potentially room for cards that you do play with remaining magicka. So as I was kind of mulling over how I thought that would work, I didn't like the idea of something being gated, right? I didn't like the idea of drawing a prophecy card, but not having enough magicka to play it for any value whatsoever, right? It was basically just like, I got a prophecy proc, and then you start to get excited, and then you realize, well, it's actually doesn't matter, I can't play it, and then there's no choice involved, right? And as I talked about already, I like times where there's choice. So I decided to borrow a different mechanic from Direwolf Digital. So if you guys aren't familiar, Direwolf Digital does a lot of games, not just Elder Scrolls Legends in terms of what they develop. They currently have another game that I frequently play, available called Eternal. It's in open beta right now on Steam and now available on Android devices. And one of the mechanics they have is called Power Surge. Their resource mechanic is power, and Power Surge cards will use all of your remaining power for that turn to play a card at, X cost or whatever that value is. So I thought that there would be room for a similar kind of card in Elder Scrolls Legends. Now, whether or not it had its own keyword like Power Surge, I don't know. Maybe you call it Magicka Surge, maybe you call it Overload if you want to borrow from Hearthstone or something. I'm not including said keyword on these cards because I don't think that part's necessarily important, but I think the idea is great, and ideally I would like it to function, at least in the client, the same way it does for their Eternal game. So even though it'll say like X, right, when you look at the card it'll say X for the cost, when you're actually playing the game it updates dynamically. So if you have like 3 power left, it'll say 3 in the upper left and it'll say 3 in the text of the card. I would like to see that same implementation in Legends if something like this were to occur. But without further ado, no more teasing ya, here are 2 cards that I think would be fun or interesting or great uses of said mechanic while coupled with Prophecy. So the first one is Reckless Pyromancy. It's again one of these surge cards, so it's got an X cost. The idea is that when you would play this, you would spend all of your remaining magicka, and if it triggered as a prophecy, then you could only play it for whatever remaining magicka was in your pool. So if you played some cards on your turn, and then you pass, and you had, say, like 3 magicka left, you could then play this for 3 if you rolled it as a prophecy. So Reckless Pyromancy says do X damage to all characters. So think like Hellfire and Hearthstone. It's going to hit your own creatures, your opponent's creatures, you in the face, your opponent in the face. I like this card for so many reasons it's almost hard to explain them all from a design standpoint. I think it fits beautifully into Strength, that idea of a double-edged sword, raw power, unbridled power, right? It's harming you to get some benefit potentially. Maybe you're triggering your own runes, it's harming your opponent. I like it as a control-based card to maybe be a board clear, because while Strength has some, for the most part they're kind of clunky. It's either things like Burn and Pillage, which feel like win more, or Fireball, which feel too weak. So, I think Strength could improve in the control department, and this could help. I like that Power Surge in this instance can be clunky. So what I mean by that is that sometimes, you'll draw this and it'll be perfect, right? Whether it's from Prophecy or even out of hand, you're like, oh man, I want to play it, I want to wipe the board. Sometimes, if you draw it super late, and you've got 12 magicka, and you don't have any other way to play other cards, you're then stuck, if you wanted to play that, playing it for 12 magicka, which means not only nuking the board for 12, but hitting yourself in the face for 12, and hitting your opponent in the face for 12, which may or may not be a good thing, right? Similarly, I like the idea of, if you've got a big threat, and you're trying to kill the board, but keep your big threat, then you'll have to play some other cards to get your magicka potentially down below that threshold, and then play this, and then you may lose value in them. Maybe you had to play a creature or two, but then they die to this. It's interesting to me because you have to play around it, and it's not a no-brainer decision to play every time, and it requires forethought to use it properly. So, as I talk about focusing on player decision as something that's important to me, I think this card is perfect at doing that, and I think it's perfect at fitting in strength, fitting in the color red, and that archetype, right? That identity for strength. I think it just fits beautifully in everything it does, and again, potentially gives it a control card, potentially gives it another prophecy. I think you could make a case that strength is kind of weak in the prophecy department right now. Not that it doesn't have them, but none of them are, I'll say, as swingy as some of the other ones. So a card like this just excites me. Piggybacking off of it, this next one is, I think equally exciting in terms of, again, creating decision and playing around it, but I think I'm less excited because it's filling a role that kind of already fits, but I don't know if you could put it in another attribute not willpower, because we're talking about straight removal. So the last card I have is Daedric Fury. This one, instead of dealing damage, is just going to outright destroy all creatures that have a magicka cost of X or less. So again, when you trigger it as a prophecy, if you have like 4 magicka left over, you can only play it for 4 and then pull all the cards off the board that are 4 or less. The idea, again, being that sometimes that'll fit into your plan and sometimes it won't. You'll have to make decisions. Sometimes you'll maybe want to save it because they've got bigger threats, so not take the prophecy and play it from hand. Again, same thing with the other one. If you are trying to nuke everything, but say you're Manticora, you might have to play a couple cards or play a card to bring your magicka cost down. It's more interesting in this game than others, for example, because this game doesn't have hero powers, right? There's not a lot of just magicka sinks, if you will, or things that you can just sink your magicka into to bring it down. So you'll have to actually invest other resources if that's what you're trying to do. So, again, I think that the card creates choice. I think it's interesting. I'm just less excited about this one, I would say, than the red one, because there are obviously a lot of hard removal that already exist in willpower, but I don't think that it really fits in any of the other colors, so that's why I'm putting it in willpower. I don't really think that it's as exciting of a identity, right? So again, strength has that whole harm me but harm you thing, so the idea of something that could blow up in your face is really exciting to me, whereas this one, again, it helps the control player for sure, and it would fill a void. I like both of the cards personally because they would serve as ways to clear hist groves. The red one, obviously, you're still punishing yourself, but I think that anyone would be fine with, I'll take 8 damage to the face, or even 12 if I have to, pay the full cost, right? I'll take 12 to the face if it means not taking, 32 because they double hist grove on me, right? Similarly, I think that the Daedric Fury card would allow Control Mage to finally have a realistic or viable answer to dealing with, multiple hist groves going off, so that, other control archetypes could exist. And yeah, ultimately what excites me about both of them is the idea of a prophecy card that's using your reserve magicka that you left behind, because that's something the community keeps asking for, and I think this does it in a way that's, not super clunky, and again, promotes decision making. I get it to pop, but maybe it doesn't clear the whole board. Do I risk putting it into the hand and then trying to play it next turn, or do I pop it because I absolutely just need to not die, or I really need to get rid of that specific threat? Also promotes decision making in the, do I have to play cards to get this under a certain threshold? And I think I really like that that idea of it's not just going to be like 100% the card you need when you need it. Like, it's going to take forethought, even from a prophecy standpoint, right? So there might be an instance where, you purposefully, hey, I've got no outs unless I top deck Daedric Fury off the top of my deck. So, maybe I don't play these 2 cards because they're not going to help me this turn, but if I do get it, I'll have enough magicka left over that I can wipe the board if he does crack this rune, right? So there's decision making even in the forethought of, gee, maybe I'll draw this card or trigger this card from prophecy. So all around, I think that these would be, great additions to the game. And if not these, again, like I always say, these are like, right off the top of my head, first idea rough drafts. I mean, yeah, I go through the trouble of like making a card, and I Google Elder Scrolls art to put them on there. But again, for the most part, like these are always meant to be, rough draft working ideas, just to kind of get people thinking about, design choices, design possibilities, directions that the game could go, directions that would excite me. And these are the kinds of design choices that would excite me, because they promote player decision and they make Prophecies not be autopilot decisions. So hopefully you enjoyed these. As I said, I hopefully have more Forge episodes coming, the next couple weeks over the holidays. I'm trying to get all of the ideas I've had stewing for the last month or so out. I appreciate you guys watching, as always, and hopefully I will catch you in the next video.